It's not very often that I do book reviews. I guess I'm not a big reader. Let's call it what it is. I tend to ingest my information through radio and video, but not too long ago, I like to consider him a friend. Lorne Fitch was up in Edmonton, and he came out with a new book, something called Consequence, Streams of Consequence, and it. I'll tell you, I've been working through it. It is a remarkable look at where we're at with Alberta right now from an environmental perspective and the threats that are being posed to everything from wildlife to habitat to fish. And it's a real pleasure to introduce Lorne to the program. Lorne, thanks so much for spending some time with us today. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you, Michael. I'm pleased to be here and chatting with you.
So let's start with, I guess, the obvious. You spent some 30 plus years as a provincial biologist, both fisheries and wildlife. You add another probably a dozen years to that in terms of just the work that you've been doing. So all told, you've been in the game for close to 50 years. Was writing this book a burning desire at year two, or was it year 48?
Well, maybe let me put it this way. It took nearly 50 years to assemble enough scar tissue to write the book, Michael.
So it is a fascinating look, and the way you framed it by using antidotes and personal stories to look at where we're at with, as I said, our environmental condition here in Alberta, which I think if I were to, it's not good.
No, Michael, it's not. There are all sorts of warning signs. There are amber lights flashing. There's lots of red lights on. And I think the sooner we understand that, the greater awareness there is of where we're at, the understanding of what the issues are and who owns those issues, the better off we'll be as the Alberta population to make some better decisions, to make some more well-informed decisions, and to make some decisions quite quickly about what we want the province to be. And that, I think, is the crux of the issue. Do we want to keep treating the province as a warehouse to be ransacked, or do we want to retain some of the reasons that we think that Alberta is a good place to live? And the economy, yes, is part of that, but it's also some of these other natural attributes and virtues that makes Alberta home. And in my case, I'm a native Albertan, and I love this province, and I am very worried about some of the pathways that we are on.
You talk about unintended consequences, and you use the Forestry Trunk Road as a prime example. And back in the day when that was being built, people kind of thought, oh, this is great, we've got access to wonderful places. But as time went on, we've started to see what that access has meant, and yet we seem to be slow on the take up to correct that. And I think you could almost use that example in many different instances right across the board. What is it that's going to take us to sit back and say, we really do need to look at our past mistakes and correct it?
I think the history of humans, Michael, is that sometimes we need to be on the cliff edge staring into the abyss before we start to realize where we're at. And the drought that we're in, bad in southern Alberta, of concern in the rest of Alberta, is an example of one of those cliff faces where we're staring at possibly a very dire future in terms of water. So these are the type of things that, I hope that my writing and the writing of others helps galvanize some awareness about how close we are, what some of the options are, and where we need to be if we want to salvage quickly some of the things that make Alberta the province that a lot of us have chosen to live in and want to continue to live in.
As recently of just as a couple of days ago, Lorne, it was announced that I think one of the oil sands projects was utilizing up to 4 billion liters of water. And you talk about the impending water shortage. I mean, look at the number of times over the course of the summer that no fishery is put on the Bow River and other tributaries. So it's a very real scenario that we're looking at right now. And I guess what I'm trying to get at is, okay, there it is. What do we as just mere mortals do to raise our concern about that?
I think the first step, Michael, is awareness. I think there has to be a higher quotient of ecological understanding, which in part I try to deal with in this book, and I will continue to in subsequent books to help people understand and grasp some of these basic ecological principles. One being there are limits, and once you exceed limits, things begin to unravel very quickly after that point. And so I think one of the other things, Michael, is that there's a sense beyond the hunting and fishing and naturalist community that it's kind of a so what response to, well, we've got declining fish and wildlife populations. Well, my answer to that is native fish and wildlife species are our indicators. There are bellwethers, there are report cards on how well we're managing the landscape. And if things start happening to them in terms of their abundance, their distribution, winking out in several watersheds as an example, or virtually every native trout species up and down the eastern slopes is either threatened or endangered, that should be a strong signal to us, whether we're a fisherman, a hunter, or a naturalist, that something has gone dreadfully wrong, and that is an indicator of what could befall us if we don't straighten things out quickly. Because despite our big brains, we are subject to the same ecological pressures as native fish and wildlife populations are. We might delay it a bit because of our technology, but we can't escape it.
Talk a little bit about our land use frameworks, and the work that you and others have done in cumulative effects and using that model. And I wonder, I guess my question is, can we look at Alberta in terms of as separate watersheds, number one, and develop plans that affect them and how to protect them? But do we need to even step back further and look at Alberta as a whole ecosystem and then kind of go from there? I'm kind of confused about that, because I've heard and seen some land use frameworks, but yet I'm still, the impact that they've had doesn't, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they are having an impact, but I'm not seeing it.
Yeah, I think the first thing, Michael, is that we are dreadfully behind in getting land use plans in place for all of the province. Some of our major watersheds, still, there has been no planning done for them, and yet the development footprint marches ahead. For those that have had, either basin plans or sub-regional plans, like the Livingston Porcupine Hills sub-regional plan, we've done, I think, an arguably good job of engaging the public, teaching them about the issues, helping them understand where we need to be, and coming to grips with things like linear disturbance, the sheer amount of roads and trails at a watershed scale, and putting limits on them. But what we have failed to do, and it's one of those things we talk about the eastern slopes as being, important that we need to plan for it, that we need to do things. But when it comes to the actual implementation, when it comes to the regulatory oversight, we seem to fail miserably. And to your point about needing to do this on an expanded scale, the quick answer is yes. All parts of Alberta need land use plans to help guide us into the future. And one of the tools that we can use for that planning is cumulative effects, because they help us understand what the current footprint is, what the impact of that current footprint is, and what would happen if we increase the footprint, which we are doing at a rapid rate, and tell us what the impact on water quality, water quantity, biodiversity, recreation, other opportunities for economic activity could be if we make one choice or another. And I think the other thing, Michael, is Alberta isn't an island, although I think these days there's a tendency politically to think of it as such. We are connected to the rest of Canada. And in some cases, and Alberta's an example, we're connected to Montana and the rest of the United States, because part of the Mississippi drainage, originates in Alberta. And our connections to the territories, to Saskatchewan and Manitoba are clear. And we actually should be planning on greater than a provincial level at a regional level.
You talk to some extent about iconic animals and fish, and how we look at them as, well, there's the bighorn ram, there's the bull trout. And you make the point that it's not enough just to admire and look at them, but to go deeper and understand where they live, and thus drawing that conclusion that, yeah, if you enjoy the grizzly bear and the elk and the caribou and the bull trout and the cutthroat trout, well, then we've got to pay better attention to the habitat that they call home.
Yeah, and a grizzly bear or a bull trout don't live in isolation. They live in concert with something called a landscape or a watershed, and within that landscape and watershed are other critters, less charismatic and less understood than grizzly bears or bull trout. And it's key, if we're going to take options to protect those species, that we do so cognizant of the fact that the other species may ride on their shirt tails, and we will come to a place where we have protected, pretty much the full range of biodiversity, instead of just the ones that we deem to be visually important or economically important, because that's those are the cogs and wheels of the ecosystem that keep it healthy, that help us understand whether or not it is healthy.
I talked earlier about unintended consequences. At what point does that turn around and become willful negligence?
It does at the point that you recognize that there are consequences to our actions, and there's enough evidence now that I don't think that many people would be able to hide behind the phrase unintended consequences. We know now enough about our development footprint, the way we've managed landscapes, to understand what the effects and impacts are. And so trying to hide behind the fact that I didn't know, or I was ignorant, as the law says, there's no excuse for ignorance.
When we look at all of this, I guess, big picture, Lorne, can't help but think that we're well beyond what a lot of people have used is striking a balance. We're at the point now where we're having to make hard choices, and if so be it, if coal and lumber and recreational use is a priority that the citizens of Alberta want, then okay, let's call it that. Not, I think we can still wiggle up the middle somewhere and please everybody.
Yeah, there's a couple of things there, Michael, that are worth talking about. One is this word balance. And I'm sick and tired of the word balance. It comes out all the time. We've got to balance the economy and the environment. The problem is when we've used up 85 or 90% of the environment and we want to achieve balance on the last 10 to 15%, it doesn't actually suggest that balance is a real term. And that's where we're at in a lot of these situations. As well, I think we have to be more honest. The government of Alberta, the federal government have to be much more honest about our economic aspirations and what the consequences of those economic aspirations are, because we can't keep kicking the can down the road, uh, you know, whistling through the graveyard saying that don't worry, we're going to make all this right, that we have the technology, that we're going to do this and we're going to do that, and don't worry, they're there, everything will be all right. It won't be all right unless we plan for it. And simply using our economic aspirations as our only goal will ultimately mean that Alberta will turn into a completely different place. And I think Albertans need the opportunity to make that decision about what they want their province to be. And that comes back to, good land use planning, where there's good engagement, honest engagement with the public, that the public have lots of opportunity to understand the current situation, to understand what the options are and the consequences, and help forge a better future.
Not to diminish the seriousness of everything that you've touched on, Lorne. We are in the Christmas season, and I'd like to end this interview on a maybe a hopeful note. Can you point to anything that's taking place that you are optimistic or hopeful for?
Well, I'm a pessimistic optimist, Michael, and despite my sometimes sense of doom and gloom, I am buoyed by examples of stream restoration that are being undertaken by watershed groups, by Cows and Fish, by Trout Unlimited, that the attempts being made to glue systems back together. I had a walk up Rocky Creek, which is a tributary to the Clearwater River, that had been subject to, really extreme off-highway vehicle activity for years. Staff from not only fishery staff, but also staff from non-government organizations, worked to create, restore stream banks to block OHV activity, to glue stream banks back together again. And it's remarkable, how quickly in that case, bull trout responded to a restored habitat. So I think what buoys me is there is a certain amount of natural resilience in our fish and wildlife populations. I'm uncertain about where the limits are, and beyond which we lose it. For example, we've now lost another native cutthroat population in Trout Creek, a little stream that flows off the east side of the Porcupine Hills. There are attempts made to do things like build beaver dam analogs to get some water back onto the land and deal with some of the OHV activity and so forth. But for example, if we keep logging at the current pace we're at, we may turn other streams into Trout Creek, and we'll miss those populations. I'm also buoyed by farmers and ranchers, and myself and the staff of Cows and Fish have had the opportunity now for 30 years to interact with the agricultural community. And it's been, frankly, remarkable. The uptake of the message, the care and attention that many farmers and ranchers have taken to restore riparian areas, which are, small by comparison to the rest of Alberta, but biologically important, ecologically important, economically important, and the work that Cows and Fish and others have done, to restore those riparian areas, I think is another one of those things that, my shoulders rise a little bit when I think about the good work that's going on there. So there are hopeful signs. I just don't want us to be interrupted by that and ignore the other stuff that needs to get done.
Indeed. And I feel like I haven't done great service to your book because there's so much more here that we haven't even touched on. Perhaps it could be the subject of a future interview, Lorne. I know I would be honored to have something like that. In the meantime, if someone is interested in picking up this book for perhaps a Christmas gift or something like that, where can they find your book, Lorne?
I think most independent bookstores carry it. And if you go to the Rocky Mountain Books website um, and Google either my name or the title of the book, it'll put up a button to push, and that will tell you where near you can buy a book, including online.
Lorne, this has been just super. Thank you so much for your time. I want to wish you all the best in the upcoming year. I know you've got more projects in the works, so we're excited to hear about future developments and, of course, keeping our streams of consequence going down the right path when it comes to Alberta's environment concerns. Thank you so much for your time today.
Well, thank you, Michael, for this, and thank you for the good work you do, which is also part and parcel of getting a message about the treasures that are Alberta's fish and wildlife out.